Hey, welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management. Today on the show, we're going to talk about 3 financial phases and which one of those phases you are in. And knowing which of these financial phases of life that you're in can actually help you to plan to build, protect, and ultimately enjoy your assets. And here's the key, friends, no matter what age you are. But before we get started, make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. All right, let's get into it. So financial phases, if we want to look at it that way, are a lot like seasons in life. They're a lot like when I'm meeting with a client, the ages and stages of their life as I share with them. So no matter what age or season you are in your life here listening to or watching the Make Your Money Matter show, if you think about it, every year we see what? We see the same months, we see the same holidays, we see the same seasons. It's very predictable, right? Now, while we may not, know what's going to happen, let's say in the winter for a winter storm, we do know that winter will likely bring what? It'll bring colder weather. And as I'm recording this, and as likely you're watching and listening to it here, we're in the month of July in the year of 2023. We just celebrated one of our holidays being July 4th, and we're in the summer season. I think with that being a predictable outcome for every year, I think a lot can be predicted here because the same can be said for financial phases. Now, again, while not always easy to predict necessarily, you can find the patterns if we look for them. And that's what I want to focus on. But really, before we get started there, how does knowing a financial phase pattern help you? And I want to be very clear here as we start this. When it comes to financial planning and wealth forecasting and your overall investments, the answer to that is a lot. So what are financial phases? There is I think, natural ebb and flow to money and money habits throughout a year as I get started here. And I'm going to give you an example in what I mean. Most of us tend to spend more around the holidays because of gifts and parties. We know this, but when January hits, let's say people take a look at their budget and what they've spent and they set goals for the year. And I think they attempt to do what I call a financial diet. We all know this as the new year, new you. We do it with our health. We tend to join gym memberships. We'll say, I'm going to eat healthy this year, so on and so forth. And the same can happen, let's say in the summer, to give another example, right? Let's say we move around, we splash around on vacations or enjoy a bunch of activities with your family. So again, what I'm sharing here is patterns. Patterns can occur. And you see the patterns that they occur throughout and basically show up in your spending and your saving habits just the same as they are with predicting or seeing the patterns we see in like the holidays or seasons. Now, imagine, if you will, for example, you're a recent college grad. You're probably living on a tighter budget with less savings versus someone who's an established professional, let's say in their career, maybe mid-year, mid-career, might be more focused on long-term goals, such as maybe buying a home or saving for retirement, ages and stages. Now, the question before we get into the 3 phases here is it the same for everybody? And I get this question asked a lot as an advisor. And while the year can offer similar periods of spending, like I mentioned, winter and summer, each individual has their own plans, their own priorities, and their own habits that make them unique. So I think it's important that when we look at this and you build a financial plan, you build a wealth forecast for yourself, know that your goals are unique, and knowing this will really help you. Knowing the patterns I'm going to bring up here can help you plan for the future. So what phase are you in? Let's get into it. The economic life phase you're in, I want to be very clear here, isn't necessarily tied to your age, as I stated in the top of the show. Now, that might shock some people because there are areas of our life we do focus on, especially when it comes to finances, that do have to do with ages. Number one being retirement, right? That I try to debunk here on our show, because retirement, if you think about that word for a second, really means what? It means becoming financially free. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to be 65 years old or, just because what the government says is the national retirement age, right? No, it means when you want to choose to live off your savings and your investments and not have a job necessarily or other income sources to support your lifestyle. So when it comes to phases though, you need to understand that it doesn't necessarily have to do with your age so much as maybe a retirement goal does. And I want to talk about these 3 phases in particular. The first phase is this: build and grow. The second phase, the transition phase. And the third one is, I'm going to call it distribute and deploy. So financial phase number 1, build and grow. During this phase, this is where you want to decide on some things. You want to decide on some longer term goals, maybe even some short term goals with your money and with your savings, ultimately into your investing portfolio. And I'd ask this of you right now, if this is a phase that you're in. Okay. Number 1 here, the building phase. Let's say you're building and growing right now. And the question is saving for your later years when you become financially free, otherwise known as retirement, is that a top priority? Pause for a second and really ask yourself that, because If it is, maximize your savings and your investments. The build and phase, the build and grow phase is all about protecting your future earnings. As my wife always tells us in the family, be kind to your tomorrow self. Today is a good time to look at, other areas of your life to protect things, because again, you're building and growing. So you do want to make sure that if you have, like say a young family, for example, you're employing things like estate plan and insurances to protect that growth. So there's a lot that comes into when you meet with an advisor, for example, in financial phase number 1, which again is the build and grow phase. Financial phase number 2, I call this phase the transition phase. And during this phase, it's important to understand what you've built so far during the years of your saving and your investing and your building and growing. It's also time to figure out how you want to live once you decide to go to that next phase, which we'll talk about next, to be full-time and not employed. Now, working with a financial advisor, as I share often, is a great idea because you are able to assess some of your savings goals and your investment goals and really answer the question, which all of us have, which is, do I have enough? Is what I have right now enough to sustain my life with how I want to live? All of those answers, all those questions you want answered can be shown to you through a well-designed financial plan or wealth forecast. And likely, if you haven't done a budget, for example, it's pretty crucial to understand your spending during this phase so you know what you will need to live off of as you prepare for that next phase. Now, before we get to phase number 3, I want to speak about something here on number 2. During this transition phase, it's important to factor in some things, some outcomes, some possible outcomes. And this is where the possibilities can start changing in your life. Many of you are in the phase right now will likely know what I'm talking about here. Things like, do I want to stay in my current home? Do I want to downsize or maybe upgrade? Are there plans to buy a second home or to travel or to move out of state? Once you'll have more time, you have to take these factors into consideration and into account. I mean, by the way, this is also a critical process to assess, how much risk you're willing to take in your portfolios during this phase versus maybe, say, the build and grow phase. They're very different. There's an accumulation aspect versus a distribution aspect, which we're going to get into next. But before we get there, a lot of this transition happens in this phase number 2, which again, I call it that way for a reason, the transition phase. In the third and final phase, number 3 here, distribute and deploy. In this phase, understanding how and where you're going to be pulling your assets from is crucial and frankly vital to your financial success. And I mean, there are important strategies to think about and ultimately some tax consequences to go through. So obviously, if you've well-funded your accounts with tax-deferred assets, hopefully do what I call at this time bucket planning, right? So you have these multiple types of assets, right? Tax-deferred, taxable, Roth assets, things like that, after-tax vehicles. You want to employ conventional ways to distribute those to make sure it's a tax-efficient distribution for your income. And ultimately, of the 3 phases, the build and grow, transition, and then the distribute and deploy, no matter what financial phase you are in, planning and preparing for that next step will always yield positive results. Now, understand when I say that, I'm not necessarily meaning positive results always in your investment accounts, but it leads you to be prepared for whatever phase is next. To better articulate your goals now for both the short term and the long term, the more likely it becomes you can achieve them, again, yielding the positive results you are looking for with your money. A great example of this is you never start a baseball game and just go immediately to second base, right? You can't do that. You got to go to first. So understanding these 3 phases, first, second, and third base, it's a great analogy to think about, right? If you're on first base right now looking to second, you want to be prepared for when you're there. And same goes for second to third. So we want to make sure we understand A, where we are, what financial phase we're in, and then B, what phase comes next and how do I prepare for that. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that today. If you did, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a single episode. And until next week, always remember to make your money matter.